There was once a city so rich, its merchants weighed out raw gold across the counter and thought nothing of it. So crowded with taverns that one stood for every 10 souls who lived there. A city of pirates and plunder, of rum and gaming tables, and every pleasure a stolen fortune could buy. So notorious that the godly of the age gave it a single name and meant it without a trace of exaggeration. The wickedest city on the face of the earth. Its name was Port Royal. Enjoy it while it stands. Because one ordinary Tuesday morning, a little before noon, the sea reached up and swallowed it whole, in about the time it will take me to say this sentence. And the preachers knew exactly why. A city this sinful, they had warned for years, could not stand. And now, they said, God had proven them right. So stay with me. Let me show you how the richest city in the New World was built, and how, in minutes, it died. And then let me ask the one question those preachers were far too certain to ask. What truly damned Port Royal? To understand how a city dies, you must first understand what it was built upon. And Port Royal, from its very first day, was built upon two things: plunder and sand. In the year 1655, English forces seized the island of Jamaica from the Spanish. At the tip of a long, narrow spit of sand reaching out into one of the finest deep harbors in all the Americas, they raised a fort to guard the way in, and a settlement grew up in its shadow. They called it the Point. And when the monarchy was restored in England, they gave it a grander name, Port Royal. That harbor would make the city priceless. That sand would make it doomed. But no one was looking down at the sand. They were looking out at the water and at what came across it. Because England was at war with the wealth of Spain, and Port Royal became the home port of the men who waged that war for profit. Privateers, buccaneers, pirates by any honest name. The governors of Jamaica flung the harbor open to them, invited the Brotherhood of the Coast to make this their den, and the Brotherhood obliged. They sailed out across the Caribbean, fell upon Spanish ships and sacked Spanish towns, and came home low in the water with holds full of gold and silver and jewels. The plunder of an empire flowed through this one narrow strip of sand, and the strip of sand grew fat upon it. The greatest of them was a man named Henry Morgan, who raided the richest cities of the Spanish Main, and came home a hero, and in time, a knight. His name still sells rum today, but there was a second engine of this city's wealth, and it is the one the pirate songs always leave out. The same wharves that took in plundered Spanish gold also took in human beings in chains. Port Royal was a hub of the slave trade, a place where men, women, and children were bought and sold and shipped onward to the plantations and the Spanish colonies to be worked until they died. The fortune of this city was built as much upon trafficked lives as upon stolen treasure. Remember that. Hold on to it, because the preachers who would soon be weeping over this city's sins somehow never could. So Port Royal grew rich, obscenely fast, built on plunder, built on bondage, built on sand. Two of those things would make it the envy of the world. The third was waiting, patient and silent, beneath its feet. By the height of its glory, in the years just before the end, Port Royal was the richest and busiest port in all of English America. In a single year, more than 200 ships crowded its harbor. There was so much coin in the city that its people scorned ordinary barter and simply dealt in gold. 6,500 souls were packed onto barely 50 acres of sand. 200 buildings, shoulder to shoulder, on a patch of ground a man could walk end to end in the time it takes to smoke a pipe. And what did they do with all that wealth? They drank it. They gambled it. They spent it on flesh. At its peak, the city held one drinking house for every 10 of its people. Taverns and gaming houses and brothels beyond counting. A fortune plundered from a Spanish galleon could be poured down throats and lost across gaming tables in a single night. And in the morning, the men would simply go back out to sea to take more. It makes a magnificent story. It has been making one for 300 years, and we have never quite been able to look away. A writer of the age called Port Royal the dunghill of the universe. As hot as hell, he wrote, and as wicked as the devil. The respectable world looked upon this place with horror and with a strange, waiting certainty. A city like this, they said to one another, could not be permitted to stand. Even Henry Morgan turned on his own kind in the end. Made a lieutenant governor of the island, the old buccaneer raised a gallows and hanged his former comrades, and left their bodies to twist in the wind as a warning to the rest. The age that had built Port Royal was already dying. The hero had become the hangman, and Morgan himself would not live to see the reckoning. He drank himself into an early grave 4 years before it came. But the true danger to Port Royal was never the pirates, or the rum, or the wrath the preachers kept promising. The true danger was beneath their feet, and in all their years of building, they never once looked down. For the city of brick and stone, the proud, heavy mansions the merchants raised to show their wealth, stood on loose, waterlogged sand. In places, on nothing more than landfill, rubble tipped into the harbor to make a little more ground to build on. And the earth here had spoken before. Small tremors had shaken Jamaica in the years past, in 1667, and again in 1688, and each time they had done little harm. So the people of Port Royal learned the most dangerous lesson any place can learn. They learned not to be afraid of the ground. They built higher and heavier and richer upon earth that could not hold them. The city had been living on borrowed time since the day it was founded, and on a bright Tuesday morning, the debt came due. It was the 7th of June in the year 1692. Late in the morning, the heat of the day already climbing toward noon. In the harbor, ships lay easy at anchor. In the streets, the ordinary business of the wickedest city on earth went on exactly as it always had. The carts, the gulls, the shouting, a distant bell. Picture a tavern near the water. At a table sits a man named Emmanuel Heath, rector of the town's Anglican church, newly arrived on this island, and quietly certain he has been sent to the most godless place on earth. Across from him sits a friend, John White, the president of the island's council. The wine has been poured. White has just struck a light for his pipe, and the smoke curls up into the thick, unmoving heat of the morning. Neither of these men knows it, but this tavern, this street, and half the city beyond it will be gone beneath the harbor before the hour is out. And then the glasses on the table begin to tremble. Heath feels it before he understands it, a shudder rising up through the legs of his chair, through the soles of his shoes, from somewhere deep beneath the floor. He looks across at his friend. "What is this?" he asks. And White, who has felt this island stir before, who knows its little tremors the way a man knows his own house settling in the night, White tells him not to be afraid. "It will be over soon," he says. It was not over soon. The shaking did not fade. It grew. A second shock came, and then a third, each more violent than the last, until the church tower itself cracked and came down. And then the ground beneath Port Royal began to do a thing for which the people living there had no words at all. The sand began to move like the sea. We have a name for it now: liquefaction. When ground that is loose and full of water is shaken hard enough, it loses all its strength, and it begins to behave like a liquid. And that is precisely what happened beneath Port Royal that morning. The solid earth on which the whole glittering city stood turned, in an instant, to something like water. The heavy brick houses the merchants had been so proud of had nothing left to stand upon. They sank. Whole streets, including the wharf itself where the greatest merchants lived and where the riches of the island came ashore, dropped into the harbor all at once, in a single dreadful crack, buildings and forts and the people standing upon them, gone between one breath and the next. And the sea, seeing the land open itself, came in to take what was offered. The water first drew back from the shore, pulling away from the land as if to gather its strength. And then it came back. A wave swept in over the ruined town, capsizing the ships at their anchors and lifting one of them, a warship, the Swan, clean over the rooftops and setting her down among the broken houses like a toy. What happened in those minutes is almost beyond the telling, and yet the survivors told it again and again because they could not stop seeing it. The ground opened and swallowed people whole. Some it took only to the waist or to the neck, and then it closed again and held them there, crushed and living, their heads still above the sand. The town's graveyard broke open, and the long-buried dead rose up out of the ground and floated out through the harbor, drifting among the freshly drowned. And in the middle of all this, one man met a fate so strange that it was carved onto his gravestone, where you can still read it to this day. His name was Louis Galdi, a Frenchman who had fled his own country years before to escape being killed for his faith. When the ground opened beneath him, it swallowed him whole and pulled him down into the dark. He should have died there, buried alive in the belly of the earth. But the earth was not finished moving. A later shock heaved him back up and flung him out of the ground and into the open sea, where he was hauled, gasping, into a passing boat. Alive. He would live another 47 years. It is a miracle. It is the kind of story that makes a crowd lean in, and I want you to hold that feeling, that little lift of relief, that instinct to cheer for the man who cheated the grave. Hold it, because I have not told you yet how Louis Galdi made his fortune in Port Royal. He made it in the buying and selling of enslaved human beings. Remember what you just felt for him. We will come back to it, because not every soul in those waters was so lucky, and not every act in those minutes was a mercy. Even as the city drowned, the very worst of men surfaced with the dead. The looting began at once, the strongest and most ruthless seizing whatever they could reach, gold and silver and plate and jewels, tearing it from the hands of the living in the open street and from the bodies of the dead in the water. They cut the fingers from corpses to get at the rings. They stripped the drowned and turned them loose again to float. And here is the moment the legend of Port Royal has almost entirely forgotten. In the breaking of the city, in the very same minutes the merchant's gold was sliding into the sea, the men, women, and children this city had held in chains reached out and took the one thing it had never once allowed them: freedom. For a few hours, in the ruin of the place that had owned them, they were free. It did not last. The eyewitness account sets down its ending in a single, unbearable line: that it was put down by the death of some and the punishment of others. Even as the wickedest city on earth was drowning, even with the sea still running in the streets, the machinery of bondage was already dragging itself upright out of the wreckage and reaching again for the people who had dared, for one morning, to be free. Hold on to that too. By the time the ground at last fell still, more than half of Port Royal was simply gone beneath the water. But the dying was not finished, because what the earthquake began that morning, something slower and quieter and far more patient would come to finish. The dead in those first few minutes are reckoned at about 2,000 souls. And in the weeks that followed, perhaps as many again. For the survivors were left stranded in the ruins of a broken city, in the pitiless heat, surrounded by thousands of unburied bodies that floated in the harbor for days on end, until the stench of the dead, one witness wrote, was like to destroy the living. And it very nearly did. Out of that corruption came fever and sickness, and the sickness moved through the survivors like a second wave, quieter than the first, and carried off thousands more. Emmanuel Heath, the reluctant rector, lived. He had run through the falling streets with the walls coming down on either side of him, and found, against every expectation, that his own house was still standing. And in the days after, he preached to the survivors from a tent, not daring to set foot inside the cracked and tottering buildings that remained. Utterly certain now that God had at last passed his judgment on the most ungodly people on the face of the earth. He prayed from his tent that they would finally reform. They did not. The taverns that still stood threw open their doors. The drinking and the cursing came back, the accounts tell us, as freely as ever, if anything, worse than before. And so the godly settled in to wait for the next judgment to fall. But Port Royal would never rise again. The aftershocks made rebuilding hopeless, and one by one the survivors crossed the harbor and began to build anew on the mainland. The town they raised over there would grow, in time, into the great city of Kingston, the capital, the beating heart of Jamaica, everything that Port Royal had once been. And what the sea had spared of the old city, a fire finished off in 1703. Within 100 years, the wickedest city on earth had dwindled to a quiet little fishing village of a few hundred houses, sitting on the drowned bones of its own glory. So there is the rise, and there is the fall. But there remains the question I promised you at the very beginning. What truly damned this city? The people of the age were so very certain that they knew. It was the wrath of God, they said, poured out at last upon a city of rum and gambling and whoring. And I want you to listen now. Listen very carefully to what they counted as this city's sin, and to what they did not. The preachers raged against the taverns. They raged against the brothels and the gaming houses, the cursing and the drinking, and the endless spending of plundered gold. But of the slave ships tied up at that very wharf, they said nothing. Of the human beings bought and sold in chains to build the very wealth that every godly merchant in that city enjoyed, and every preacher in that city lived upon. Nothing. The same eyewitness account that so carefully counts the city's drunkards and its looters records the deaths of the enslaved as a thing barely worth the ink to write it. Besides blacks, it says, besides blacks, 600 or 700 more, counted apart, counted last, counted as an afterthought. Now think back to Louis Galdi, the miracle man, the one you wanted to cheer for. A slave trader, spat back out of the earth to live another 47 years, and buried, at the end of them, beneath a proud stone that calls his survival an act of God. If the God of Port Royal reached into the earth to spare one man that morning, he reached in and spared a man who trafficked in human souls. That is the moral arithmetic the survivors never once stopped to do. Perhaps they could not afford to. And as for the wrath that was supposed to have done all this, the judgment the preachers staked their certainty on, there was none in it at all. There was no anger waiting in the ground. The earth was sand, and the sand was wet. And when the earth shook, the sand turned to water, and the great proud city built upon it simply flowed away into the harbor. It was always going to. From the first morning they laid a brick upon that spit, the city stood on borrowed ground. The sea did not rise up to punish Port Royal. It only came, at last, to collect what it had always been owed. And there the city remains, even now, not gone, drowned. The streets and the shops and the taverns lie beneath the harbor exactly as they fell, frozen in the very instant the sea took them, the closest thing the New World has to Pompeii. For decades now, archaeologists have dived down into those green waters to walk a sunken city held perfectly still at a single moment in time. And somewhere down in that silt, they found a watch. Its hands had stopped near the noon hour, the exact moment the wickedest city on earth ran out of time. So I will leave you where the water leaves you, with the one question its preachers never once thought to ask. If a city grows rich upon plunder and upon the buying and selling of human lives, and then calls its sin the rum and never the chains, when the sea at last rises up to swallow it whole, was that a judgment after all? Tell me what you believe. I will be listening from beneath the water.